Yes. Okay, we are live. And give me just a minute. If you are, there we go. Wonderfulness. Yay. Okay, so we're live. And what I want to do is first just thank you for joining me and thank everybody that is going to tap in. I want to give a minute for people to get tapped in and logged in to the conversation. And let me turn my volume down. There we go. I wanted to thank you two for joining us this evening and taking some time out for this like timely discussion. And then I've got a couple of folks that are going to be tapping in as we're going in our discussion. So first of all, my name is Tony McNeil. I'm a community organizer with Faith in the Valley here in the San Joaquin County. And a lot of folks, that will tap in, they already know who I am. However, for those that do watch, I'm not only organized in the San Joaquin County, Faith in the Valley. We are a federation that is spread out throughout the entire Central Valley. So we do community organizing in San Joaquin County, the Stanislaus County, Merced County, Fresno County, and Kern County. And the common ground that we have throughout those counties is policing, police accountability, public safety is an issue all throughout the Central Valley. It's everywhere. So, but in Central Valley, it's just a real special and unique thing, it seems. And so today, I wanted to really hold a conversation with individuals that could help us as we are organizing around police accountability and what that looks like. I really wanted us to learn some things. I wanted us to have a broader understanding on how we can organize between visible and invisible power. So before we even start diving into that, I would love it if you guys would introduce yourselves and let us know, who you are, what you do, and all of that. So, Marshall, start with you.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. It's really truly an honor to be here to serve in the community. My name is Marshall Arnwine. I work for the ACLU of Northern California, and my office is in the Sacramento area. And I focus as a criminal justice advocate, specializing in police practices. Some of the realm of work that I help contribute to is use of force, whether it's the AB 392 law. I help with the Public Records Act, was SB 1421. I do a variety of know what to do when you're stopped by the police workshops, helping people understand their rights there. And I also help with sheriff accountability in Sacramento as well. And that's the realm of work that I do so far. I've been at the ACLU for almost a year now, and I really enjoy helping the community get the rights and get treated the way they should be.
That's really not, and that was exciting, only because we actually helped and worked and organized around 1420. Is it what 1492 and 1421?
21, yes, and
Yes,
392.
and 392. So we were there when the governor signed it. And so that's how involved we were. So thank you. I really appreciate you being here to help us become more aware today. And Yoel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Tony, for having us today. My name is Yoel Haile. I also work for the ACLU of Northern California. I primarily work on our DA accountability project where, we work to hold district attorneys accountable who are, one of the main players and officers responsible for creating mass incarceration, but also who are tasked with the task of holding the police accountable when they commit crimes. So, I work in all over the state on our DA accountability project, including San Joaquin, Fresno, Kern, the whole Central Valley area, as well as Sacramento area, Bay Area, and down south. So I'm glad to be part of this conversation and talk about the responsibility of district attorneys to hold police officers accountable when they commit crimes.
So I'm really, really glad to have you both here. And like I said, we have two more guests that will be joining us momentarily. In the meantime, we enough to get this thing going. So today I wanted to invite you all in as informed and credentialed individuals to help us in the San Joaquin County have a better understanding between the visible and invisible power of police accountability. And so, first, I want to just make clear visible power is the power that you see, that's the face. And so, when it comes to visible power, typically, when as people in the community, the face that we see and ascribe power to is the chief. And the other face that we see and we ascribe power to is the DA when it comes to police accountability. And so I wanted to talk about the other entities that, are there and the interplay that happens between them. And so when it comes to like police accountability, um, can you help us understand the roles that are being played, by these different individuals? And we can pick one. Y'all want me to pick one, or y'all just want like, what's the visible power, and who holds the visible power seats? What are those roles?
Wow, there's so many ways to tackle it, like you said. Well, I more specialize in the police practices area, so I could talk a little bit about that, and Yoel, feel free to jump in where you see fit. So, the police chief is pretty much the head of the police department. That they help set the policies and the plans for the particular police department, how they go about their training, their responsibilities to the officers. So the police chief is a critical person to know in your community to make sure that that's an area where you know how to communicate with that individual to be able to make complaints or to be able to communicate things that you see in your communities that are harmful. The police chiefs are also, I think it's important to note the police chiefs are also held accountable by city officials, the city council members. And I believe Stockton have 6 city council members and a mayor as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those people are critical to know in your specific district, because wherever district you live in, you can be connected to your city council member who was elected. So they need to be able to help you advocate on your behalf when it comes to the police chief. So there's so many different ways to understand the roles, but I think the simplest way is the police chief helps set the policies for the police department, and all the police officers answer to that individual. And then I think there's another component to understand who the police chief answers to. And so that's the city council members and the mayor who can help the police chief um, remain accountable if there's certain civil rights violations to the people in the community, or if you're seeing a lot of police brutality. There's a lot of different avenues that you can take to try to hold the police chief and the department accountable. And I think the first step is knowing who those players are. And so whatever district you live in, know who your city council person is, and then knowing who your police chief is as well, how you can contact that individual.
So there's a lot of interplay then when it comes to the chief accountability that is tied into the elected officials that are there: city council, city mayor, city manager. In our city, the city manager is the he's the boss of the chief. So we are aware of that. However, now then what you're saying is that when it comes to accountability surrounding policy, city council and the mayor have a role to play as well when it comes to holding the police chief accountable. Am I
Yes.
making sure I'm getting that right? Okay.
Yes.
So we need to know all those players. We need to have relationship with them, so that if we need to hold the chief accountable, we need to be able to deal with and go to our city council members and our mayor in order to raise awareness or express a concern.
Yes. That's
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Okay. So that's around the policy. Um, what else? Visible power. What other visible power is there? Because to me, that's easy. Okay, well then let's do it this way. That's easy. So if there's excessive use of force and we need law enforcement to be held accountable, we should go to the chief. The chief then should be able to do it, right?
In theory, yes.
Okay. Well, so in theory, what's going on behind that theory?
Yeah, the in theory part is yes. There is a excessive use of force in the community, and the community members go to the police chief, whether it's via, I don't know how they're doing it now, Zoom, or through a letter to the police chief. That's just one form of advocacy, but we know that the police chief could possibly just ignore that inquiry that is being made by the community. So I would consider galvanizing and organizing a group of people to be able to form some type of coalition or collaborative effort to connect with multiple organizations, because there's so many organizations that deal with the same issue but may not know each other, and it's better to have strength in numbers on these type of advocacy, because it's easy to ignore just one person that's making a complaint against the police chief, but it's way hard to do so when there's multiple organizations, multiple invested community members, and also having that leverage of the city council person as well, who may be able to get their email or call answered more quickly than a grassroots organizer. So that collaborative effort of knowing who your council member is, that was the importance I was trying to iterate. That
Mm-hmm.
yes, we don't want to just rely on our elected officials, but they do have a leverage that may not, that the community may not have, which is unfortunate, but it is true that some people get their calls and emails answered quicker than those in the community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I like that because and that's true. As she said, it's harder to ignore multiple invested community member organizations. And so then what happens, hypothetically speaking, if we then have a chief that says, okay, we're going to hold them accountable. We're going to hold law enforcement accountable. We want to do the right thing. And so we're going to discipline, law enforcement officers, because we see this happen too. And then I don't know, there's something that happens in some invisible room, to where nothing happens and those officers, are still there. So what's going on? Where do you deal with the police officers union and the DA? Who comes in then?
I don't know if you want to jump in with the DA and the police union part, but go for it if you want to. And
And
what's up,
let me
Tiffany?
real
It's good to
quick.
see
So yeah,
you.
Joel, you go ahead, and then Tiffany, I'm gonna have you just, and I see you smiling and rocking. So so
Go
I'm gonna
ahead.
let you introduce yourself in a second and just have at it. And y'all talk about it.
Let the sister introduce herself, and then we can continue the
All
conversation.
right, Miss Tiffany.
Okay, thank you. Tiffany Rosal Moyer. I'm a civil rights attorney. I work for Lawyers Committee of Civil Rights, located in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm actually based in Sacramento, so a lot of the work I do is up here. And yeah, my practice is around policing and supporting the defund the police movement, and also looking at the ways in which policing institutions like jails and juvenile halls and psychiatric hospitals impact our communities. And by our communities, I'm speaking specifically about Black communities.
Right on. Tony, you want to repeat the question just so I make sure?
Well, yeah. So who else? Is there anybody that can trump the decision of the chief? No pun intended. I meant to offend no one when I said Trump. So is there anyone though that can Is the chief the end all? Is he the ultimate disciplinary, the ultimate decision maker, are there other players here that can override the decision that is made by the chief?
Yeah, unfortunately there is, and this happens in no other job anywhere, as far as I understand it. But with police officers, because of partially because of what is called the police officers, Bill of Rights, which is something that needs significant reform, if not getting rid of it all. Is you can have a situation where a police chief can look at um, the conduct of an officer and say this is out of policy or illegal, and therefore we're going to fire you, right? Then police officers have a special right to go into something that's called arbitration, where the decision to officer will be reviewed and can be overturned. And this has happened in a lot of cities where, even though it's generally actually rare for a police chief to like fire cops, right? We don't see it as much as we would like, or in a way that's proportionate to the misconduct that a lot of cops do. We've also seen many times where the chief looks at it, they decide to fire them. The city manager affirms the decision to fire that cop, right? The city manager is, in a lot of ways, the supervisor of the police chief. Then they go into arbitration, where, in a way that nobody really, it's not even a transparent process. And it could be 2 3 years later in arbitration, and then the department is actually forced to hire back that cop and pay them for all the years where they did not get
Oh,
paid
stop it.
between the time they got fired and the time the arbitration orders them to hire them back. So if that process takes 2 years, that police department has now to pay this officer who was fired 2 years worth of salary and keep them in the force, right? And that's really a function of the kind of special rights that are granted to police officers that are not granted to any other worker in the state. Most of us, if our boss says we're fired, that's it. That's the end of that. Like, unless there was some sort of discrimination where we could like appeal to the courts or something, or sue our employer, no other worker gets these kinds of additional rights, especially when we've done something wrong that warrants us being fired in the first place.
So I have a question from one of the community members. What sort of information access does the public have to the arbitration process?
Tiffany, you may know this, but as far as I understand it, we actually don't really have any. We just know it went to arbitration and then the decision. But I have not seen any. But it may just be that I haven't seen it. But I don't know if Tiffany or Marshall, if you guys know anything that's public about it.
I don't actually. Same as you. In my research, I've seen arbitration happen. They rehired the officer. And that's about it. But I also haven't litigated these issues. So perhaps, Marshall, you know a little bit more than I do, or this person has asked a question that we all need to go back and research and let you know.
Yes, I agree. I don't know either. That's an awesome question that I need to learn myself.
And I read through the excessive use of force policy protocol. I've been in the rabbit hole today. And I see nothing. They don't even release it. They release the findings, but I didn't even see where they released their decision to the DA. And out of the 4 options that they have, there's only one that leads to consequence. So 3 options leads to restoration, which was just absolutely beyond me. I couldn't even understand.
Yeah, so I think I'm just looking it up, and so it says it prevents the public from learning the extent to which officers have been disciplined as a result of misconduct. It effectively shuts off all avenues to learn about misconduct involving individual police officers, excessive force, dishonesty, officer-involved shootings, patterns of misconduct and leniency. All of this stuff is completely confidential.
I also was looking at today where so and these are just I'm just kind of throwing out random scenarios and questions based on things that I was reading today that so if there's body cam that is worn that it is actually reviewed by the officers that are under investigation with their union representatives in order prior to anything else. So how powerful is the police officers union?
Too powerful. They have way more power than they should.
Yeah, absolutely. What's coming up for me is that the police union, I was having a conversation with a colleague, regularly threatens even public officials for speaking publicly about what's going on. So say, I think Marshall was mentioning building power with public officials who are allies, that person risks being threatened by the union and losing their position. So it's not just covering, CYA of officers, it's also people's whole livelihoods are at risk for questioning police as a result of the union's power.
So
you know what?
Go ahead,
What's
Joel.
ironic about this, Tony, is that the reason why a police union exists and the funds that they have to be threatening public officials is actually public dollars, right? It comes from the public funds that's paid to the officers as salary. It goes to the union as part of their union dues, and then it's actually used to undermine the rights of the public.
Hold on. Wait. You can't drop bombs like that in a space like this and then keep moving. Back up. Say it again. We go, ooh, let's rewind. Okay. Public. So say that again.
So any union, right? The union dues are like taken out of paycheck. So it has money and resources to be able to advocate for my rights as a worker out of my salary, right? We know that the salaries of police officers are paid out of the public dollars, right? The tax
the
dollars.
147 million tax dollars that is going to
we pay for residents that we pay for.
Hold on, wait. So are you playing? Go ahead. Let me put myself on mute. You can't tell an organizer this kind of stuff when the organizer just went through the political parties that were contributed to. And now you're telling me that the contributions that are going towards even some of the elected officials that on behalf of the union folks is coming out of tax dollars that's being paid for okay, but let you finish your sentence.
Through the salary. So it's not a direct like pay as if we taxpayers are, just paying the unions, but we pay police because they're supposed to be public servants. Then they pay their union dues, and those union dues that that really come public are then used to undermine the public interest, that are used to undermine the public, right?
So is it safe to say, or have you ever saw where it is difficult for an elected official to even support the outcry of the people when it comes to police accountability because of the contributions that they're receiving from the police officers union? Is there any tension that is within that? That's just have any of you ever seen that tension?
Do you mind repeating that for me?
So is there ever any tension when it comes to elected officials supporting the community in holding law enforcement accountable for misconduct when they are supported also heavily by the police officers union? Is there ever tension in that space?
Yeah, I think that especially after the uprisings over the summer was a large conversation around the nation about where that tension is coming from. And the ways in which that can show up is that, unions can support candidates as they run to be elected. And once they're elected, then that city council or the other government body is now negotiating the contracts with the police unions. And so they're overly deferential at that point to the police unions. And so that's one of the ways in which y'all was describing earlier, where people can't be fired without arbitration. That's not a clause that needs to exist in those contracts.
Okay.
The other conflict that I usually see in accountability work is that, the cops will kill somebody. And this is something we've seen in real life, right? We've seen it in Sacramento. We've seen it in Alameda and a bunch of other places. The cops will murder a Black person, typically. And then the cop union will give campaign donations to that DA, who then turns around and decides not to charge those cops with anything. The Sacramento DA has done this, right? Right after the murder of Stephon Clark, the police unions dumped thousands of dollars into her campaign. In Alameda, when the DA in Alameda was running in 2018, Fremont police were being investigated for killing a pregnant teen. And then one of the cops who actually killed the young woman happened to be the head of the police union, the Fremont Police Union Association, and they donated $10,000 to the DA, who then, miraculously found that there was no wrong and that nobody was going to be charged or held accountable for the killing of this young lady.
And Sacramento specifically reminded me of that race with DA Schubert. And in her campaign, she said, I will not do investigations of police. We need independent investigators, so police aren't policing themselves. But of course, as you all just pointed out, that after those donations from the union, she has charged not one officer, who unfortunately many people who have died in Sacramento.
Goodness. So this is
why we need people like Tiffany to be the DAs. I'll just put my side plug.
Okay, see, Tiffany for DA. We got a race coming up in 2022.
That's right.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We're nonpartisan. Faith in the Valley is nonpartisan.
So is the ACLU, but we do want good candidates who will hold the police accountable when it comes to justice.
So
justice is nonpartisan.
Man, you better say that. So now when we get into the DA, I was reading, like I said, through just, some of the protocol, and what have you. And so after the arbitration, if they pick one of the three, to where like they were within their rights, it was an accident, or there was one more, I wrote it down. So if they pick 3 out of that 4, then, they turn it over to, specific people. I don't see where they turn over after the arbitration and the investigation. I don't see where they turn it over to the DA. So does the police union, after they do their thorough investigation, that is led by the police. So after the police investigate themselves, their entity in regard to whether or not this was or was not misconduct, then do they turn it over? They turn it over to themselves again. Where does the DA get involved in this, Tiffany?
I think Yoel knows way more about DAs than I do, actually, given your advocacy over the last couple of years. So I'm going to throw it over to you.
We'll want to it. So typically, the role of the DA, just not just with the police, but generally, what the purpose of the office is to determine whether a crime has been committed to, the penal code, whether there's sufficient evidence, to prove beyond reasonable doubt to a jury, and then make appropriate charging decisions. Right. That's what the DA is supposed to do. The DA looks at the cases that are brought to them by the police in every case, right? In instances where the police are the actual perpetrators of crime, right? When they're the ones who actually do the crime, point out, Tony, typically they investigate themselves, which is, problem number 1. Just at the onset, how do you somebody who committed misconduct investigate itself? And then, take it to the DA. So I think one of the main things that has to be like resolved here is that an independent body should investigate. Nobody should investigate themselves in any situation, right? If you're being accused of doing harm, investigating yourself is a conflict of interest from the get-go. The second piece is, the police have to determine that a crime has been committed. Typically, that's when somebody gets arrested, right? Police themselves aren't determining a crime committed. They're not going to send it to the DA because there's nothing to send to the DA, right? But I think, the DA's job here as it relates to, police accountability is one, when there is a misconduct, right? When somebody dies at the hands of the police, when the police kill somebody, or when the police like brutally beat somebody, like independent body should investigate what happened, and the DA could look at what happens and say, did a crime happen here? And if so, what are the appropriate charges for the specific crime, right? We've seen so many videos of, for example, police just beating people to death, right? Beating people within half inch of lives. And if it was like, you doing it to me, you would automatically get like charged with like assault, with like, with an enhancement for great bodily
Right.
injury and all these other things, and
Right.
facing serious prison time, right? When police do that, we have rarely seen DA offices charge them with anything, right? We've rarely seen, like district attorney offices charge cops who we have seen like in videos murder people, and they don't even get charged with like manslaughter or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the role that they play, is when these things happen, or when crimes, they're supposed to investigate what, and they're supposed to make a determination, like to charge those officers with, which is an area I think we've seen them woefully fail.
So I do know here locally that we do have the city managers review board. And that is our city manager was very, very intentional and productive in, pulling together various community members into people that play significant roles within the community. And however, I don't know if that review board functions as the same as an independent review board. So can you give us an example, of maybe some of the things that an independent review board can do?
I could talk a little bit about that. And you said your Stockton's is called the City Managers Review Board.
Yes, sir.
And do you know if Stockton have like a police review commission, or is that the version Stockton has, the City Managers Review Board?
It's the city managers review board. We used to have
Okay.
the police chief. The police chief did have at one point an advisory committee, and then there was a group of individuals that came together that went through, the policies from the community's lens, and made a lot of recommendations and stuff. And now last year we just launched the city managers review board. And so there are, law enforcement that is on the review board, and then you have a few community, activists, youth representation that is there, some clergy, yeah, and so there. So it's made up of a very diverse group of individuals that go over, data and the statistics and are just moving towards really making some real progressive changes towards policy and different things. And so I'm looking at that and I'm wondering, is that the same? Would we then in our city look at that as the same maybe as the independent review board? Or are there elements to an independent review board that are standalone and different?
Yeah, I would argue. I think I heard you mention that there's some law enforcement on the City Managers Review Board.
Mhm.
I would argue that to have some type of independence a review board should be civilian led without any law enforcement on there. I do think it depends on who you ask. There is a potential, um, I guess, advantage to have someone that understands the law to be on the review board, but for it to have some type of independence, I think a review board should be civilian led, should be people that have direct impact with police brutality, people that are formerly incarcerated or family members of those that are formerly incarcerated, because you want the civilian review board to be representative of the people who are getting harmed. It would do no good for the civilian review board or the independent review board to just be another branch of the law enforcement. So, for example, in Sacramento, they have what's called a Sacramento Community Police Review Commission, and that commission reviews policies of the police department. It makes recommendations on what policies should be updated and changed. This review board holds kind of like a public comment outreach for people to give comments on specific recommendations that needs to be updated. And even though the biggest drawback, though, from these review boards is that they typically lack power. And what I mean by that is these review boards make all these great recommendations. These are volunteers spending so much time and hard work on these important issues, but the police chief doesn't have to accept them. But I don't want people to be discouraged on not being involved in those type of commissions, because it still can have some effect. So, for example, in Sacramento, the Police Review Commission were working for years to strengthen the Sacramento Police Department's use of force policy under AB 392 that went into effect in 2020. And for years, they were saying that Sacramento Police Department needs to increase and strengthen their policy, but they were being ignored. About a year later, the Department of Justice released 2 phases of reports on recommendations that the Sacramento Police Department needed to implement. And they were very similar to what the Police Commission was already talking about. But it took the DOJ coming in for there to be some movement behind the getting sped up on the police department changing the policies. Even the ACLU, we were invited by the Police Commission to come give a presentation on why the police department was lacking in their policy. And I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, but about 2 or 3 days later, after that presentation, their policy got updated to reflect a little bit more in alignment with the law. But the important part is, without that Police Review Commission giving us the platform to speak, in addition to the DOJ, and having other community members on that board as well, it was so many people saying the same thing that I believe it made the department move and change policy. So I really want people not to be discouraged when there's an opportunity to join these type of commissions. Of course, we want to push for it to be as strong as possible, to have things such as subpoena power, to be able to subpoena documents and witnesses. But in the event that you only have a review commission board, still feel encouraged to be a part of it, because there still could be changes that are made from that.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because I don't. So what we want is a win-win, and I don't see it being a lose. That we have the city managers review board. I believe that it's definitely really progressive, and there are some really really amazing people that are at that table, that are really proactive for making change. For policy. So I'm wondering, in this, I was wondering more so, what's the difference when it comes to for the community? So the community, when they were doing demonstrating and stuff for George Floyd, a lot of community was feeling like, well, this doesn't answer, this isn't what we're asking for. And they're looking at examples like oversight committees that have subpoena power and different things. And so in this, one of the leaning ins that I'm trying to do is to satisfy that by asking, what are some things maybe that are done does San Francisco have an oversight committee, or a review board? What do we do in order to strengthen it, even if we need to strengthen it, but what do we do to strengthen it? What are things that we may not have? So like what subpoena power, what does that do? What's the benefit of that?
Essentially, subpoena power allows, it's a court order that allows for either a witness to come testify or documents to be produced. So say, for example, there's some document that the police department doesn't want to give up or doesn't want to come to a particular hearing. The subpoena power is basically a court order that the judge signs to compel that specific evidence that's being asked for by the person issuing the subpoena. And so it's harder for someone to just brush off you asking for particular documents. Mm-hmm. That's how I usually explain it. I would love to hear from Tiffany as well to get her perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why subpoena power is so important is because the community needs access to information in order to do its job of analyzing what's going on. And so I guess what I would encourage people to remember is that the police department is an agency of the city. So they have the entire city invested in the perception of their success. And then pair that with the police union that Yoel was just explaining to us is incredibly powerful. And they have a lot of power consolidated in the police agency. And so having an independent review commission needs to have some type of level of power that compares or that can confront that. And so having subpoena power is one method of doing that, because you can compel that police department to provide information, regardless if they want to, so that you can develop your own analysis of what's happening. Say it like that.
I think the only other thing I would add to the point you raised earlier, Tony, which is as the agency of the city, what can be done. I think it's important to look at the accountability mechanisms, like having subpoena power, absolutely critical, like having a civilian oversight commission. But as a city agency, as something that the city council, the mayor, the city manager are supposed to oversee as part of the public safety conversation, right? One of the big demands of the movement is to defund the police, right? Because majority of, for example, in Oakland, we found out that 40% of the calls that come to the Oakland Police Department were for mental health crises. Why are we calling the police when somebody's having a mental health crisis, right? And there's an actual disproportionate number of people who are killed by the police were killed because the family members or somebody else called for help and then ended up having to deal with a dead son, right? Mm-hmm. Or a dead daughter. And what would it look like that 40% of police budget and reallocated it so that people can have mental health services, clinics, therapists in their community, so that we can deal with issues as they're rising instead of when people are at their breaking point, right? And so I think that's one of the conversations that has to go parallel with, whether or not the department is as big, or the police departments are as big as they are now, or that we make them small after we defund them. We still need a civilian oversight commission. We still need it to have subpoena power. We still need it to have the power to discipline rank and file officers and fire and hire the police chief, right? These are important accountability mechanisms that need to exist, whether the department has a $300 million budget or a $12 million budget, right? But I think the parallel conversation that has to go with it is, how do we actually change it so that the police aren't called for everything, and the money that's being wasted in police departments and sheriff's departments and DA's offices can actually be in creating housing, childcare, universal basic income, food security, all these things that human beings need, that would actually eliminate and the need for carceral solutions, but also would actually create public safety, right? Good neighborhoods, good schools, good jobs. You have those things, that is public safety.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. It's just bringing up defund the police, the average law enforcement officer in California makes over $100,000 a year. And often these police review commissions or these independent review boards are unfunded. These are just volunteers. So people are expending a tremendous amount of resources trying to oversee this agency that is bloated with funding to the detriment of the residents of that government or that municipality or county. Which, by the way, in Sacramento, police only respond, there's only 4% of the police response is for violence. 96% of what they do has nothing to do with somebody's physical safety. Now I'm just ranting, but but I'm just trying to say, like, the commission, if you're going to be challenging the police, like, resource allocation is incredibly important too. Because once you get that data, let's say you have the subpoena power, what are you going to do with it? You need people who can review it, people who can analyze it, people who can put it in a way that's accessible to the community afterwards or accessible to the board that they're presenting it to. Yeah, I'll end.
Tiffany's point is so true, because we're actually in the process of publishing a couple of reports about prosecution data, right? And across the board, we've actually found that less than 10% of what DAs prosecute, of the thousands of cases that they prosecute, less than 10% are actually for serious and violent, like felonies, right? And the reason, and Tiffany's point is that, like, less than 4% of what the what the police respond to is for violence. So what are they doing, right? And what they're doing is they're harassing homeless people. They're like charged, and that's what the cops are doing, right? They're like arresting kids for vandalism and petty theft and all these things, and they're spending all their time charging DUIs and petty thefts and vandalism, all things. And these are things that could be like solved through restorative justice circles, that could be solved through diversion, pre-plea, that could be solved by just providing people food so they don't have to actually like try to steal food, right? Or like baby wipes, things like that. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, it's and you are not, you're not ranting, and I'm being intentionally quiet, and very thoughtful, in regard to things that I say. So one of the things that the community is rallying together to do, is an initiative that we call Stockton, and so we've been really pushing that, and have a lot of traction on that, and that is based on the pilot that they just launched in the Bay Area called Macro, and Cahoots program. So that's an initiative that we're definitely pushing, and pushing hard. So I'm really excited about that, and not quite sure where the city is going to land on it, or PD, because it would be something that would need to be budgeted in. Definitely, we're not looking at it as defunding the police. We are looking at it as a line item and reallocating some funds towards, a program that would allow individuals to respond to nonviolent calls, to de-escalate, so that we're not sending officers out for calls that are unnecessary. And then that frees them up to respond to the violent crimes that they need to as well. So that was my well thought out plug in regard to Call Stockton, and that initiative. And so we are pushing for that. And I got really quiet because when we say defund the police here, yes, so even our mayor is very, very adamant about being against defunding the police. And I only know that because of the candidates forum response that he had to the question. And they weren't even open to doing that when it came to defunding the police in one of our school districts, because we have a school district that has its very own police department. And it is, and look, so can I rant now or y'all ranted? I'm trying to understand, because I believe that, if not, last I heard, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong in the chat somewhere, somewhere to the tune of an $8 million contract somewhere around there, but definitely in the millions. Um, and I'm trying to understand how in the world do we have a contract for it's a very own Stockton Unified School District Police Department when we are in COVID, the schools are closed down, the children are distant learning, and who are they policing? Who are they policing? The Zoom calls? I mean, I'm trying to figure out like what they showing up for. When we have budget cuts and they can't afford, to keep some of the staff and, just all of these different things. That's my rant. And so, yes, I'm thinking they could reallocate. Shoot, they could take some of that money, and attribute it to some other causes as well. So, but all of the interplay, the police officers union heavily behind that as well when it comes to supporting and keeping that contract active and that stuff going. So yeah, we got some work to do here.
I mean, this is madness, right? There's most countries in the world don't have school districts that have police in them, right? How do you have, it's just how many nurses are in these schools? How many counselors are in these schools? How many, therapists are in the schools? What the hell is a police officer doing on a school in the first place?
Yeah. Go ahead, Tiffany.
I was just going to say, I feel I'm not representing anybody else's thoughts with this, but, when it comes to defund the police movement, I just want to encourage folks to really say it with your chest. I think a lot of these city officials, want to challenge it because it's a radical thought, so they say. But what you're talking about in reallocating funds is just what that movement is saying, right? You've completely tipped the scales toward this violent institution, and we have people who are unhoused who just need something to eat. And your city budget could fund that. And that's what the defund the police movement is. And so by changing the way that we phrase what we really mean, I think that city officials really get to kind of water down or undermine the movement, undermine what especially our young people are asking for. And I guess the final point there is like, remember how much power you have as the people. Like, don't let their power, their language that they're using undermine that power. When you say defund the police and you mean we need other services, take money away from them, then say it and repeat it until it's normal. Because it's not actually a radical thought to be able to house people and care for them and provide them psychiatric care. All right, that's the end of that rant part 2.
Say it with your chest. Say it with your chest. That's what she said. Shoot, I have to say it with my chest. We need to defund the police. Say it with your chest. We're trying to find nice ways to say it and be politically correct and figure out, the language to use in order for it to be acceptable. And when we say defund the police, are we saying get rid of police altogether?
I think it depends who you ask. There are certainly abolitionists who are behind the defund the police movement, and there are people who are not abolitionists who are behind it.
Yeah, I agree. It depends on who you ask. Some people use defund as a means to get to the goal of abolition, and some people literally just want the funds to be properly allocated to where it should go. So, yeah, I think that the educational piece is so important that I don't think people really understand what it means to defund the police in theory or in practice, because I think that people did understand it, they wouldn't be so scared behind it. I think most people can agree that people should have food, people should be able to have somewhere to live, people should have good education. I don't think there's a reasonable person that doesn't agree with that. But when people operate in fear of the unknown, then it creates this anxiety about how do we live in a world without police? And because that's what we've had for so long, and then understanding the history of police, that it used to be, slave patrols, and it became law enforcement, and just having that deep understanding of the white supremacy and that educational background, I think most people, either didn't know or just didn't have the push to actually read into those things. So I mean, I encourage people that may feel uncomfortable in using defund language or don't understand it to really understand how policing came about in the first place. And I think when you really read it, you may have a change of heart on how you view the system, because it's a systemic structural item. And I think people that are against defund think that we're attacking individual people. It's the systemic structure that is harming people because of what it used to stand for and it still stands for. So that's just what I want to put out there, is to really educate yourself on how law enforcement got started, and then you may have an inclination as to why people want it to stay. And I'll leave it at that.
And like, whether you're an abolitionist or not, right? And the common thing here is that, don't you want your child to be in a school that has nurses, that has college counselors, that has therapists? Because obviously a police cannot do three things, a police officer on the campus. Don't we want collectively, right, to have clinics and hospitals that we can just walk to and access, right? That housing is guaranteed as a human right, that there's nobody going hungry, there's nobody out on the streets, right? And it exists. It's not like there is a lack of funds, right? What there is a mismanagement of public funds to use it for something that does not prevent violence. And there's so many unsolved cases. They're not even good at solving like the stuff that actually say they're good at, right? Or they're supposed to be serving. But that's a conversation for another day, right? I mean, how many like untested like rape kits exist across all these police departments? How many homicides are unsolved, right? Like, so let's set aside your actual competence to do the actual job you claim to be doing, right? If we just look at the numbers and we're saying those are like less than 10% of what you actually do, right? Where's the 90% going? What are you doing all day sitting, right?
No, they're not sitting. They're over policing 6% of the population.
Exactly, right? You get into one car accident, there's like 12 police cars. Just need one. Clear the intersection, that's it. Why are there 12 police cars like blocking everything, right? Because you're not really doing anything, or you're harassing people, or you've run out of people to harass, so you're just doing stuff, right? So all here, the common thread here is that like we all do collectively better when the things we need as human beings for healthy, safe communities, we can just get them by reallocating resources. And let's start there. Let's go from there. That's all.
I just want to say, you don't even need one officer. Like, why do you need a police for a car accident? Like, it's so irrational. And that's actually a framework that a lot of abolitionists use. It's like when you start to break down why you call the police, there's so many things. They've just dominated the conversation around their usefulness in order to keep themselves relevant. But you don't have to call the police for a car accident. You can call the city, do a report,
So as we're wrapping up, one of the things that I did want to say is that that we do need to have a deeper conversation in regard to even over policing. I've done a significant amount, of training and research and been in the city of Stockton. We know that 90% of the policing is being done with 6% of the population. And so, in our communities, then if there's, say, a homicide that takes place, in a hot spot, as we would call it, that then you have, a large presence, of policing that is driven in that one area. So we've got the other areas that are saying, well, you're taking too long, to show up because this vagrant person is, is trespassing on my private property, this homeless person, and I need you to come, and remove this homeless person. However, that's not something that is taking place, in the other spots that are being over policed. So I did want to raise awareness, for that. So yes, we really do need to look at the reallocation of the 64% of the county budget that is for public safety, where the bottom fraction of that public safety goes to public defenders, and the top of it goes to the sheriff, and then the DA, where you're proven innocent. Aren't you innocent until proven guilty? Shouldn't the lion's share be going then to the person that is ensuring that? And so anyway, let me come off of my rant. Let me back up. I really appreciate you all so much for stopping time in your life to come in, because I know y'all busy. I'm busy, so I'm magnifying your busyness probably times 10. But I am so appreciative, and I know that those in our community are appreciative. Yeah. So, do you have any like final word, any final thing that you know just want to leave for us that we might be able to take away and apply, other than say it with your chest? Tiffany laughing. Say it again, Tiffany. Tell us again.
Say it with your chest. Say what you mean. Say what you mean if you want to get what you need.
Okay, you guys. So I really appreciate you and thank you for your wisdom. I may have to call on y'all again at different times while we're working on some stuff because yes, we're creating chatter this weekend. You guys will be jumping in again all over the throughout the weekend, talking about police accountability. Yes, you know, like when police offend, that's the hashtag. So I want you to share this video. The hashtag is when police offend. Share it. We now know visible power, that's the chief. He can do some things, but he can't do everything. His decision can be overturned by who? The police officers union. They can do a whole lot of stuff and trump a whole lot of things. The DA, she can hold some folks accountable. However, her hands might be a little bit tied too. So there's some stuff that we got to organize, some things that we need to do. And I'll be getting at y'all with some next steps and some asks later on this weekend. So love you all. Peace.